It's Friday, and I'm back with the next in our Fanzine Friday series. Today we're taking a look at First Encounter number 2. Please stick around. I'm AZ Mountaineer. This is our channel, Old School Rules, where we celebrate the community of old school gamers and grognards who like classic RPGs, miniatures, magazines, and everything that goes with it. Each week on the Fanzine Friday series, I take a fanzine from my collection off the shelf for a closer look. Today, it's First Encounter number 2. Hope you enjoy the video. Today I'm back with a look at this fanzine from the Great White North of Canada. And this is sort of a special edition because I actually don't have a copy of First Encounter number 2. I got a copy from a member of our community, a fellow collector, Mark Petrick. A big thank you for helping me out. So I had a complete collection of these that I could cover in my fanzine videos. First Encounter number 2, again, the product of Kelly Villemaire, and this comes to us again from Canada, over near, I think he was near British Columbia, if I remember correctly. And this one is from August of 1982, so a couple of months after First Encounter number 1. These fanzines are kind of hard to find, and one of the reasons is because of the way they were made. 8.5 by 11 paper. They were given out for free, handed out maybe at stores, sometimes put in with other things you might have ordered from his company, and they tended to fall apart. And one of the things Mark told me about this issue is that it's actually sort of like glued along the spine. And so as you might imagine, even just opening this one up would cause it to sort of fall apart, cause the pages to fall out. And so when he moves to the next one, number 3, he starts stapling them again. It gives him a little bit more stability, I think. So this one, it basically appears to be his product. He doesn't have a lot of credits there, but let's start here by taking a look at the cover. Now this artwork is initialed at the bottom, ZTOH. And I happen to know that a guy named Eric Hotz was an artist who participated with him in a lot of this activity. Again, there's a great interview with the both of them on Grog Talk. I'll put a link to that down below in the description. So yeah, I think this is just Hotz, obviously spelled backwards. Really cool art. You've got these dragons up here in the air, this castle, and it's under siege, right? Which is very thematic, because as we're going to mention in a minute, that ties into the vast majority of what's in this fanzine, a very detailed discussion of siege weapons and siege, the process, the attacks, I guess you might say, how to resolve that, and a good look at castles as well. Okay, let's take a look at our table of contents. On the inside of the front cover was a chart, I think, to keep track of time in your D&D game for the Dungeon Master. I think probably the idea was you would photocopy that, and then you could use that. There's a short editorial in their table of contents, a word search, and the Northern Society of Creative Anachronism. More mail, which is their letters column, a little bit of news, some information about secondary skills from the DMG, and then a very long article. It goes from like page 4 to the end of whatever, 18 pages, siege engines and castles. In terms of this fanzine, Kelly basically does all of it. Eric Hotz does the cover art, and then Ross Johnson, I believe is his name, is who contributed the word search. So here is the chart on the inside page where you keep track of time. Days, turns, rounds, segments are there. It says, write in pencil, but I don't think I wouldn't have used this. I would have photocopied it. Has some sort of a little mini DM's screen. Some information about time. 6 seconds is a segment, 10 segments is a round, which is a minute. 10 rounds equals a turn, which is 10 minutes. 6 turns equals an hour, right? Torches last 6 turns, lanterns 24 turns. Players in armor heavier than leather need to rest every 6 turns. Something for you to note, wandering monster rolls should be every blank turns. I guess you fill that in. And then here we have time at sea, time in the dungeon, time on land, time in town or city, and planar travel, days, weeks, months. I think that would be the ideas there, is that you mark how long your players are spending doing that. Then a little time chart to use. Searching for secret doors around, listening for noise around, searching for traps 1 round, examining and mapping 1 turn. Thorough means to open a secret door takes a turn. Breaking down a wooden door with an axe takes a turn and results in 3 wandering monster checks. and then movement rate per round for different humanoid types: brownies, bugbears, dwarfs, elves, gnolls, gnomes, goblins, halflings, hobgoblins, kobolds, men, cavemen, ogres, orcs, half-orcs, pixies, sprites, troglodytes, and trolls. So again, like a little DM screen, bit of information here concerned with time, movement, and a few of the things you would commonly do in the dungeon. We've got this, I call it the editorial, his little short and sweet. He says, hey, I've got this fanzine put together. It took me a couple of months, which I think is a pretty good time. Once every 2 months is pretty good. He mentions the upgrades. The first one he mentions is not stapled. He calls it bonded. But again, I think over time, at least, that paste, when it dries out, when you try to lay it flat, it's going to crack and the fanzine sort of falls apart. And these fanzines didn't necessarily hold up the best over time. They were free, and so maybe people didn't value them quite so much. I think he would put them in when you ordered a game supplement or something from his company. And generally, it's just kind of really hard to find these fanzines in good shape. And in that article, I mentioned there's an interview with Kelly on Grog Talk, and I'll put that link in the comments. He talks a little bit about the making of the fanzine and how they didn't tend to hold up over time, etc. He's encouraging people to send in letters. He has his first batch of letters from issue number 1. We'll talk about it in a minute. So he's encouraged you to tell me what you like, what you don't like, what you want to see more of, etc. And he welcomes the readers from the Society for Creative Anachronism and says he's glad to publicize events that people are doing. Has some thank yous here. Here's the word search. As I said, it's from Good Stuff Games. I think up there it says Ross Johnson. And there are a number of monsters that you would find here in the word search. And then he has an article about the Northern Society for Creative Anachronism. So the original societies down in California. And these are people who LARP, right? Live action role playing, get together, dress up like a knight, like a wizard, whatever it is, and sort of role play, act out that stuff. More Mail is his letters column. And he's got two letters here talking about his article on polearms. And there are a few things about this fanzine that I think really stand out to me as sort of the feel is different. And one of them is the subject matter that Kelly chooses to cover. He feels a little bit more like a wargamer's background, maybe someone who's a little older, more mature, the kind of things that he's interested in writing about and the detail with which he goes into it. I mean, I think he would have gotten along really well with Gary Gygax. I'd be interested to know if Gary ever read this, because Kelly's focus on, that article about all these different type of polearms, we know that Gygax was really into that. The discussion this time about siege weapons and castles under siege, that sort of focus on historical medieval information and the understanding of that detail was something that Gygax liked, and clearly Kelly does as well. The other thing that I noticed about this fanzine is the amount of advertising. He has 10, 12 probably different businesses advertised in here. I don't know whether they paid for those ads or not, but it strikes me different than a lot of fanzines how much advertising he has for local gaming stores. Okay, so he's got the two articles that are very complimentary. The polearms encouraging him to do more. He says, of course, he's got the siege weapons in this one. He'll do other weapons, armor, etc. in the future. So that's something sort of unique about the First Encounter fanzine. And finally, he's got a letter here from Eric Hotz, who says, I'm a wargamer. I wish you had more wargaming. And of course, the reply is, well, this magazine's focused on D&D. I want to, in Tunnels and Trolls, RuneQuest, and all the rest, I want to encourage some crossover from wargamers, and also congratulates Eric for being the winner of the cover contest. Remember, his art was on the front cover, and I believe Eric continues to be a part of First Encounter going forward. Okay, so here's our news. He talks about the the Dragon's Lair D&D tournament, mentions the team that won that convention, and there's some advertising. And then he has this article on secondary skills. If you remember in the Dungeon Master's Guide, I think it's in the 70s, maybe it's in the 50s, there's that D100 chart where you can roll up a secondary skill for your character. Random sort of village type of skills your character might have had before adventuring, but they're not particularly explained. And so I think Kelly's idea is, well, let's put a little game information into that concept. Now, of course, if you do that, I think as a dungeon master, then you're going to have to flesh out all of those, and you want to be careful not to give too many sort of in-game bonuses. because then it matters a lot more what their background is, and people start to sort of want to min-max towards something in particular. But anyway, that's his idea. He covers one today, which is the forester. And here are his ideas. Good reaction rolls from treants or other plant life, sentient plant life. 10% chance to blend with the forest, and a thief has an extra 10% to hide in shadows when in the woods. Here, movement chance, move silently chance, even if you're not a thief. Ability to cover your tracks, 90% chance, so you can't be followed, for example, by a ranger. You can climb trees without having to make any kind of a skill check. +1 to hit with a bow. Excellent skills with fishing. Chance to identify safe plants or berries or whatever in the woods so you don't get poisoned, right? You would have that background knowledge. And an ability to find true north. I don't know about those thief skills, if you will, although they do make sense. But the last few about, being able to identify plant life, finding true north, that kind of thing, doesn't feel like it really does much to unbalance anything in the game. So I do like that idea. And as you remember from discussions of other fanzines I've covered, the idea of secondary skills or background skills for characters was a really popular concept that shows up a lot in fanzines. Okay, let's get into the real meat of this fanzine, which is this long and intricate article on siege engines and castles. As I mentioned, Kelly clearly had a good interest in this. There's a lot of sort of research and historical understanding of how this all works. So he says he recently ran a contest or adventure where the players were dwarves inside a fort or inside a dwarven fort, and then outside were a group of 200 goblins. And he gave the people inside, here's the different type of things. You have oil, you could boil, here's the different weapons you have, and you're inside the town. And then the other person had control of the goblins, and he gave them, I think, 1 or 2 pieces of siege equipment and some other weapons, and let them go at it. And he's got some rules he talks about in here for things like how long it would take you, how much it would cost you to build additional equipment or buy other weapons and stuff. And so it seemed like it was, obviously different than the normal D&D adventure, but the kind of thing that players would still think sounds like a lot of fun. And I think these kind of larger combats or sort of unusual types of combats are interesting things for players to tackle every once in a while. You can do something like that. And he said, one of the questions was for a lot of people was, I see this list in the DMG about these different types of weapons, but I don't actually know what a lot of those weapons are. And so he's going to give you an explanation for that as well. Okay, so we'll talk about these. So the first one is called a gallery. And the gallery is essentially a roofed construct, right? And he says often they would put some type of animal hide on top of there. And the goal is it protects you from missile weapons from above, as well as someone tries to dump burning oil or fire, whatever, on you. And so your people are underneath of there, right? And it's like a gigantic shield that they would carry. And if you look here underneath, they have like a battering ram, and it's providing them with some protection. And here's another example of one that kind of has walls on the side. And then if you look inside here, you have people who have a hold of the ram that they're moving back and forth. The next thing is the simple battering ram. It's pretty straightforward, right? And he says, on the bottom, you've got literally the ram's head on front of this pole. The battering ram usually has some piece of iron and a tip, and you run it back and forth, smashing. Really good for soft rock, and in particular against wood. Not so good for the really hard stone or very thick walls you might find on the main part of a castle. And so you have this other item on the top here that's called the sow, and it's more of a point with a crank, and it's sort of essentially drills into harder stone to make a small hole, and then of course you can work that smaller hole bigger. And he even has rules here. Like I said, Gary would love this stuff about percentage chances that you crack the stone, how you can work it over time to make the hole bigger and stuff like that. Next we have the catapults. And as he describes it in there, there was something called an onager or an onager and the mangonel. And the onager's on the right-hand side here. And it's essentially a catapult that has like a giant sling at the end. And so what happens when you release it, the sling flicks it much like a sling would in your hands, whereas the mangonel mangonel is the traditional catapult with the giant spoon, if you will, that you put something into and it flips it forward. Both of these crank tension and release tension to cause the propulsion. In contrast, you have the trebuchet, and it has a long arm that gets bent, but the power of this is by a counterweight. You see the small drawing there on the right side of that where the weight's up in the air, and when you let the rope go, the weight pulls it down, which then flicks it and has a giant sling arm that releases the stone or whatever else is in there. And then you had this small one on the bottom here, get myself out of the way, that is a curved arm, and that's called the springald. And it's different because you have a small stone on the end of the arm, and then you have a sling, and so it would sort of flick. One was almost like a tiny catapult indentation to flick, and then it also had the sling contraption that you had, so it could throw 2 stones. It could be loaded to throw 2 stones at once. And then finally you have the ballista, and it talks about this is essentially a giant crossbow. The regular ballista is on the left, and one that they call the arcu ballista is on the left, which has like the extra arms for more power. Both of them you crank back and create tension, right, like the crossbow, and then you release that. He says the arqueballista could be used to not only shoot lances, or giant bolts, but also lead balls. And the last thing he talks about, he doesn't have any pictures of, let me go backwards here, is other things you might use for your siege, like ladders, and he's got a whole, again, Gary would love it, whole set of rules about the use of ladders, what your options are, which are essentially shoot down at them, attack the person as he gets to the top, try to pull the ladder up, try to knock the ladder backwards, or obviously attack from some other means. And he's got a whole chart of percentages based on the number of people, how many people are on the ladder, how many people are holding the ladder. It affects your ability to try to knock it down. And he also has a chart for the use of the catapult or other weapons. You decide where you want to hit. You roll to see if you hit, and if you do, he's got a chart there hitting the base of the wall, going into the castle, hitting exactly where you aimed, a little high, a little low, knocking off the top of the wall. And then if you miss, he's got left, right, up, down, kind of way that you would roll again to see where that catapult missile ends up. And the last thing he talks about is something he calls wildfire, which is this mixture of chemicals that would burn and you could not put out by water. And so obviously you would lob that in to either catch buildings on fire or other wooden structures, walls, gates, etc. on fire, or obviously people. And he's got the description of different types of recipes you could use, and basically says the regular alchemist, if you allow this in your game, an alchemist could create one of these types of potions, or not potions, one of these types of mixtures. He talks a little bit about how it would be made and what type of thing you could use to put it out. Some things can't be put out at all. Some things use vinegar, some things use water, but nothing uses water to put out this special kind of fire. Okay, now let's turn our attention to the defensive side of this, which is the castle. And so he talks about the idea, obviously the game has been designed to allow a fighter or other type of hero who gains certain levels and an amount of gold to build their own sanctuary, stronghold, or castle. He said, but what exactly are you doing and how does all this stuff work? So he starts here with arrow slits, and he does a good job again of giving a lot of diagrams. He has arrow slits from the inside and outside of the castle to sort of show you what it looks like, and he talks about if you're running a siege combat, the bonuses, armor class bonuses you would get from inside, what you can do based on the different type of defensive fortification that you're using. So here's the next one with some more diagrams. He explains what a Merlon is, their crenellations, battlements, ramparts, and various other things that could be built here. And so let's talk about those. So you got arrow slits, obviously. He says give you a +4 on your armor class and you attack as normal. The barbican is this area usually near your entrance, I believe. The Bartizan. It's basically like a tower that's covered on top, so you can't be hit from above, or other missiles. So basically, your only weakness would be attacked by a catapult trebuchet missile. The battlement is the part that's up there along the top of your wall. And then he talks about drawbridges. He said you get 3 types. The main simple one, right, is the wooden plank, 2 chains, and use a winch to wind it up. But he has diagrams here, get myself out of the way, for 2 other types of drawbridges. One is the one on top here. You have the counterweight, where it's basically a pit, and so if you walk across it and you get inside, the drawbridge comes up, and the people could fall into a pit. Obviously, you have the portcullis there as well. And up at the top, you have these little things he calls like maki collations. Maki collations. Talk about that in a minute. And then the other type of drawbridge here, where it has like arms that come out that are counterweighted, and you could use that as well as a way to design your drawbridge if your players are going to get excited by or interested in that kind of thing. He also talks about having shutters that cover your arrow slits, and says normally those would crank upwards, so you're protected from anything coming down, but you can still shoot down at targets. Other different kind of locations up here at the top, like I said, this maki collation is a hole in the floor that allows missiles to be shot or other types of things to be dropped down. The kind of thing that basically, like, once you get through the first door, maybe at the portcullis or past the portcullis, but you may be in an enclosed courtyard with another gate, and this is where you're dropping flaming oil, shooting arrows, etc., down on people, hopefully in a little kill box that you would set up there if you were designing a defensive structure. And then he talks about the best way to protect yourself, he says, is you have to have a moat. And he even has rules about how you get through a moat, which is throwing straw or hay into there, and you got to put bale after bale in to absorb the water enough, and then you throw dirt on top to give you some type of footing to get across. And of course, you're getting attacked the whole time you're doing that. You're using that technique as well. He talks about murder holes, which are similar to the maki collations, but it's always in the castle. Whereas the maki collation might also be on where you build up and then you kind of have an overhang, so that you can create a way where you can attack down along the edge of the wall. The parapet is the stone wall that surrounds the top of your castle. The portcullis, we know, is the iron gate that drops down. A ditch, he says, is the poor man's moat. And then you've got the curtain wall, which is straight, and the bastion wall, which is curved and provides superior protection. And of course, if you have it, this wildfire is going to be an extremely dangerous weapon, maybe a game changer, because you can set people's stuff on fire. They can't get the fire out. That's going to do a lot of damage, especially to all these things, right? All these siege weapons are largely wooden. So if you can catch that stuff on fire, you're going to do a lot of destruction to the attacker. Okay, so here's the last page, and you've got, again, this is the carryover that talks about the 6 different ways to make this fire, the type of chemicals you could get, and the cost of those chemicals from the local alchemist, and the solution to the word search puzzle, and a little teaser about what we're going to get next time. Charts and tables, letters, secondary skills, cartoons, and an editorial. And here's your back page, which is, again, an advertisement for the Canada's largest comic store, the Comic Shop. And again, I just think the art's pretty cool, so like that. So that's the end of our look at First Encounter number 2. A really good fanzine, slightly different vibe, but I really like it. It's sort of the slightly more thoughtful and in-depth for those who are trying to add some particular part of realism into their campaign. I think Kelly does a fantastic job. I'm looking forward to looking at the rest of these. As I mentioned, there are 8. So next week we'll be back and take a look at First Encounter number 3. Hope you guys are enjoying the series. Hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope you're subscribed. If you've got friends who might be interested, send them our way. We're looking for more subscribers. We are climbing our way up to 1,000, slowly but surely. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. Until next time, my friends, keep rolling 20s.